10 weapons the world has banned. Each has its own story, and each has a reason why even war could not justify it. Exploding bullets. The St. Petersburg Declaration, 1868-IN 1863, Russian engineers developed a bullet designed to explode on impact with the human body. The weapon immediately raised concerns. Russia's war minister, Count Dmitry Milyutin, wrote directly to Emperor Alexander II, "To use such a weapon against people is barbaric and cannot be justified by any military necessity. An ordinary bullet is enough to disable a soldier." Russia then did something almost unheard of in military history. Instead of deploying the weapon, it proposed banning it. In November 1868, representatives from 18 nations gathered in St. Petersburg. On December 11th, every delegation signed the declaration. The agreement prohibited any projectile weighing less than 400 grams that contained an explosive or incendiary charge. It became the first international treaty in history to ban a specific type of weapon. Before then, there were virtually no international rules governing the weapons used in war. The St. Petersburg Declaration established a principle that still lies at the heart of modern international humanitarian law: weapons that cause suffering beyond what is necessary to disable a combatant are unacceptable. Dum-Dum Bullets. The Hague Declaration, 1899-IN 1895, the British Army began producing a special type of ammunition at an arsenal in the Indian town of Dum-Dum, near Calcutta. The bullet was designed to expand after entering the body, causing severe internal damage and tearing tissue apart. British officers considered it necessary. They argued that standard small-caliber bullets were often unable to stop a charging enemy quickly enough. In 1898, British forces used these rounds during the Battle of Omdurman in Sudan. Before the battle, some soldiers reportedly filed down the tips of their bullets by hand, increasing their expansion on impact. Military surgeons documented wounds unlike anything they had seen before. The injuries were extensive, jagged, and often accompanied by massive bone destruction. Their reports quickly reached newspapers across Europe. The controversy was immediate. The Hague Peace Conference in 1899. The issue of Dum-Dum Bullets was brought to a vote. 22 nations supported a ban, only 2 opposed it: Great Britain and the United States. Britain ultimately refused to sign the declaration, arguing that such ammunition was necessary in colonial warfare against what one British delegate described as savage tribes. The ban entered into force for the countries that accepted it. Today, expanding bullets are widely used by hunters and law enforcement agencies around the world. However, they remain prohibited in international armed conflicts. Chlorine gas. The Geneva Protocol, 1925. On April 22, 1915, at 5 p.m. near the Belgian city of Ypres, the German army opened the valves of 5,730 gas cylinders. Within minutes, 168 tons of chlorine formed a yellow-green cloud and drifted toward French positions. The soldiers had no idea what was happening. Chlorine burned the eyes and airways, damaged the lungs, and caused temporary blindness. Those who tried to run often breathed faster and died faster. Around 15,000 men were affected. Approximately 5,000 died on the battlefield. Many of the survivors suffered permanent injuries. Over the next 3 years of World War I, every major combatant used chemical weapons. New agents soon appeared: phosgene, a gas with no color, no smell, and no effective antidote. Then came mustard gas, which could burn through skin even beneath clothing. By the end of the war, chemical weapons had killed more than 90,000 soldiers. Another 1 million suffered serious injuries. The scale of the devastation shocked the world. In 1925, nations gathered in Geneva and signed a protocol banning the use of chemical and biological weapons in war. Most countries eventually ratified the agreement. The United States, however, did not ratify the protocol until 1975, 50 years after it was signed. The horrors of World War I had demonstrated that some weapons were simply too destructive to be accepted, even in war. Biological weapons. Biological Weapons Convention, 1972. On April 10, 1972, 79 nations signed a historic agreement that went further than any arms treaty before it. For the first time in history, countries agreed not only to ban the use of an entire category of weapons, but also their development and production. The Biological Weapons Convention required its members to destroy all existing stockpiles. It was a groundbreaking decision. Nothing comparable had ever existed before. The Soviet Union signed the convention. That same year, it secretly began violating it. In 1973, Soviet authorities created a classified scientific and industrial organization known as Biopreparat. Officially, its purpose was to produce medicines and vaccines. In reality, it became the largest biological weapons program ever assembled. By the 1980s, roughly 40,000 people worked within the organization. New biological agents were reportedly developed year after year. Anthrax, plague, smallpox, Ebola, Marburg virus. By 1987, biopreparats facilities were capable of producing up to 200 kilograms of dried anthrax or plague cultures every week. Then came an accident in 1979 at a military facility in Sverdlovsk. A worker removed a contaminated filter and failed to record the procedure. When the next shift restarted the equipment, millions of anthrax spores escaped into the atmosphere. At least 6 to 4 people died. The Soviet government blamed contaminated meat. The real cause remained hidden for years. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union did the full story emerge. In 1992, Russian President Boris Yeltsin publicly acknowledged both the accident and the existence of the biological weapons program, yet one major problem remains. Unlike many other arms control agreements, the Biological Weapons Convention contains no formal inspection system. There are no routine international inspections. No independent verification mechanism. Today, 189 countries. Napalm. Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, 1980. On June 8, 1972, a South Vietnamese pilot dropped an incendiary bomb on the village of Trang Bang. The pilot had made a mistake. Instead of enemy forces, civilians were caught in the attack. Among them was a 9-year-old girl named Phan Thai Kim Phuc. The weapon was napalm. A thick, gasoline-based incendiary substance that sticks to the skin, burns at extreme temperatures, and can continue burning even in water. Kim Phuc's clothes were burned away as she ran down the road screaming, "Too hot, too hot." An Associated Press photographer, Nick Ut, captured the moment. The photograph would become one of the most famous images of the 20th century. A year later, it won the Pulitzer Prize. Napalm had been used long before the Vietnam War. It was employed during World War II and later in Korea. But it was Vietnam, and that photograph in particular, that transformed napalm into a global symbol of the devastating impact of war on civilians. As public outrage grew, pressure mounted for international restrictions on incendiary weapons. In 1976, negotiations began on limiting their use. 4 years later, in 1980, Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons was adopted. The protocol prohibited the use of air-delivered incendiary weapons against concentrations of civilians. However, the restriction applied only to weapons delivered from the air. Under certain conditions, ground-launched incendiary weapons remained legal. As a result, no complete international ban on napalm exists. To this day, Kim Phuc survived. After undergoing numerous surgeries, she eventually left Vietnam, received asylum in Canada, and later established a foundation dedicated to helping children affected by war. The pilot who dropped the bomb later stated in interviews that he had not known civilians were beneath his aircraft. More than 50 years later, the image of a young girl. Blinding laser weapons. Protocol 4 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, 1995. In 1995, a Chinese state-owned defense company unveiled a new weapon at military exhibitions in Abu Dhabi and the Philippines. It was called the ZM-87 laser weapon. Unlike traditional firearms, its purpose was not to kill, its purpose was to destroy eyesight. According to promotional materials, the system could permanently blind a person from a distance of up to 3 kilometers. With optical equipment such as binoculars or scopes, the range could be even greater. Shorter distances, the laser could temporarily blind and disorient targets. That same year, the United States completed development of its own portable laser system mounted on an M16 rifle. The U.S. military planned to purchase approximately 2,500 units. The program's budget was estimated at $80 million. For military planners, the technology offered a new way to disable enemy forces without necessarily killing them. For many governments and humanitarian organizations, however, the idea raised serious ethical concerns. Permanent blindness was viewed as a particularly cruel and irreversible form of injury. Diplomats feared that if such weapons became widespread, future conflicts could leave thousands of soldiers permanently disabled. On October 13, 1995, nations adopted Protocol 4 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. The agreement prohibited laser weapons specifically designed to cause permanent blindness. It was a historic decision. For the first time, a weapon was banned before it had been widely used in combat. No battlefield disaster. No mass casualties. No decades of evidence. The international community chose to act before the damage was done. Following the agreement, the United States cancelled its laser rifle program. China halted production of the ZM-87. Despite the ban, reports have occasionally surfaced claiming that similar systems have appeared in North Korea. Anti-personnel landmines. The Ottawa Treaty, 1997. On January 15, 1997, Princess Diana walked through a partially cleared minefield in the Angolan city of Huambo. Wearing a protective vest and face shield, she took a path that many considered too dangerous for a member of the British royal family. The images quickly spread around the world at the time. Angola was emerging from more than 2 decades of civil war. An estimated 9 million landmines remained scattered across the country. The population was only slightly larger than that every day. People were being killed or permanently injured by explosives hidden beneath the ground. Anti-personnel landmines are designed to detonate when a person steps on them or triggers a tripwire. The problem is that they do not distinguish between soldiers and civilians, and unlike most weapons, they continue to kill long after the fighting has ended. Some remain active for decades. Children, farmers, and aid workers often become victims years after peace has returned, according to the Landmine Monitor. More than 120,000 people were killed or injured by landmines between 1999 and 2017. Approximately 87% of those casualties were civilians. The growing humanitarian crisis fueled international action. In December 1997, just months after Princess Diana's death in Paris, 122 countries signed the Ottawa Treaty. The agreement prohibited the use, production, stockpiling, and transfer of anti-personnel landmines. The treaty entered into force in March 1999, faster than any major arms control agreement before it. Many nations began destroying their stockpiles and clearing contaminated land. However, some major military powers chose not to join. Russia, the United States, and China never signed the treaty. Support for the agreement has also faced new challenges in recent years. In early 2025, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Finland announced plans to withdraw from the treaty, citing increased security. Cluster munitions. Convention on Cluster Munitions, 2008. In the summer of 2006, during the war in Lebanon, the Israeli military fired an estimated 4 million submunitions contained within cluster bombs across parts of the country. According to United Nations estimates, up to 1 million of those submunitions failed to explode on impact. When a ceasefire was declared in August, civilians began returning to their homes. Many never made it there. Instead, they encountered unexploded bomblets scattered across fields, roads, and villages, small, brightly colored, and often mistaken for harmless objects or even toys. A cluster bomb works differently from a conventional bomb. Rather than exploding as a single weapon, it opens in midair and releases dozens or even hundreds of smaller submunitions over a wide area. This allows it to strike multiple targets at once. But it also creates a serious problem. A significant percentage of those bomblets fail to detonate immediately. Instead, they remain behind as de facto landmines, posing a danger long after the battle has ended. The consequences can last for decades. One of the most dramatic examples can be found in Laos. Between 1964 and 1973, during the secret air campaign associated with the Vietnam War, the United States dropped approximately 270 million submunitions on the country. Tens of millions failed to explode. Since then, more than 20,000 people have been killed by unexploded ordnance left behind from the conflict. The war in Lebanon renewed international attention on the issue. In February 2007, Norway launched a diplomatic initiative outside the traditional United Nations framework. The goal was simple: create a treaty specifically banning cluster munitions. Negotiations moved quickly. On May 30, 2008, 107 countries adopted the Convention on Cluster Munitions in Dublin. Later that year, on December 3, 94 nations signed the agreement in Oslo. The convention prohibited the use, prod, chemical weapons. Chemical Weapons Convention, 1997. On January 13, 1993, representatives from 162 countries gathered in Paris to sign one of the most ambitious arms control agreements in history. The Chemical Weapons Convention, unlike previous treaties, this agreement did more than prohibit the use of a weapon. It required countries to physically destroy their existing stockpiles under international supervision. For the first time, the world was attempting to eliminate an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. When the convention entered into force on April 29, 1997, the challenge was enormous. Russia possessed the largest chemical arsenal in the world, estimated at around 40,000 tons. The United States held approximately 28,000 tons. Together, they controlled the vast majority of the world's declared chemical weapons. Over the following decades, both countries began the lengthy process of destroying their stockpiles. The convention was widely viewed as a major success, yet events in the Middle East would soon test its limits. One of the countries that had not originally joined the treaty was Syria. That changed in 2013. On August 21 of that year, rockets carrying the nerve agent sarin struck opposition-controlled suburbs near Damascus. According to international estimates, hundreds of people were killed, many more were injured. Videos from the aftermath shocked the world. Victims struggled to breathe, some collapsed within minutes. Others showed signs of convulsions and paralysis. Sarin is a colorless, odorless nerve agent. It interferes with signals between the brain and muscles, causing respiratory failure and death if exposure is severe enough. International pressure mounted rapidly. On September 14, 2013, Syria agreed to join the Chemical Weapons Convention. The country declared its chemical weapon stockpiles, and an international effort was launched to remove and destroy them. By June 2014, the declared stockpiles had been eliminated. But the controversy did not end there. Multiple investigations later concluded that chemical weapons continued to be used during the Syrian conflict. The findings reignited concerns about enforcement and accountability. The Chemical Weapons Convention remains one of the most comprehensive disarmament treaties ever created. More than 190 countries have joined it. Millions of chemical munitions have been destroyed. Yet the events in Syria demonstrated a difficult reality. Even when weapons are banned, ensuring that the ban is respected can be just as challenging as negotiating it in the first place. The convention changed the rules of war, but enforcing those rules remains an ongoing struggle. Non-Detectable fragmentation weapons. Protocol I of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, 1980. Among all the weapons featured in this video, this is the only case in which a ban came before widespread casualties. In the late 1970s, several countries began exploring new types of ammunition designed to leave behind fragments that could not be detected by standard X-ray equipment. Unlike traditional metal shrapnel, these fragments were made from materials that would be nearly invisible to military doctors and surgeons. The concept raised immediate concerns. A soldier wounded by such a weapon might survive the initial injury, but hidden fragments could remain inside the body for years. Doctors would struggle to locate them. Surgical removal could become impossible. What might have been a treatable battlefield wound could instead turn into a lifetime of complications: chronic pain, infections, internal damage, and repeated medical procedures. Humanitarian organizations and medical experts argued that the purpose of these weapons was not simply to disable an opponent, but to create suffering that continued long after the battle was over. Unlike many weapons that were restricted only after devastating real-world use, this threat was identified before it became widespread. Governments decided not to wait. On October 10, 1980, delegates meeting in Geneva adopted Protocol I of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. The protocol prohibited any weapon whose primary effect was to injure through fragments that could not be detected by X-rays. T was a preventive ban. The weapons existed largely in research and development programs. They had not yet produced large numbers of victims. The international community chose to act before that could happen. The decision reflected a lesson learned from more than a century of warfare. Waiting for proof often means waiting for tragedy. Sometimes the most effective humanitarian action is preventing a weapon from reaching the battlefield at all. And in this case, the world drew the line before the damage was done.